warm welcome to ET Studio CFO Blueprint in association with ET CFO. I'm your host, Divina Lasson. Now, in this series, we are thrilled to bring you conversations with India's leading CFOs to help us get unique insights about the journey of the modern CFO. Today, we're here to decode the call to action, mastering the ESG journey. Now, ESG today has emerged as a key part of leadership discussions across organizations, vying to foster responsible business practices and long-term value creation. This also gains importance as stakeholders and private investors see a value in these non-financial disclosures. However, mastering the ESG journey is no simple task. So here to help us deep dive into this and much more, our esteemed panelists, MS Jacob, Wholetime Director and CFO, Colgate Palmolive India, and Debasis Nandy, President and Group CFO, Thomas Cook India. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So, let's really kickstart this conversation by setting some context. We're here to understand all facets of ESG, how it impacts businesses, the role of the CFO in really harnessing and making part of an organization's DNA, the way an organization functions with keeping ESG parameters in mind. But just to get kickstarted and to sort of lay the foundation, Jacob, maybe you can help us understand the extent to which ESG impacts business today, and how does a CFO step in to really take charge and make sure that everything is happening as per process?
Yeah, as you know, ESG is received more than its fair share of attention across the world, and India is no different. We are seeing our investors, we are a listed company, our investors increasingly, asking pointed questions about our progress on ESG parameters. We also seeing things like, when we go to the campuses to recruit MBA grads, they want to know about our ESG journey. Our employees keep asking. So, every which way you look at it, it's getting to be very, very important. Yes. And what, as a CFO, what I do is, I think areas that, we've been traditionally very strong at, leveraging that to further this journey. Examples, reporting. Reporting is what, financial reporting is something we are really good at. But this, in ESG, this is really a little bit all over the place. There are, some standards, some reports. A lot of it is evolving, and with our experience in this area, we can intervene and make sure, reporting is what it should be. Similarly, things like compliance. Remember, we are working in an ecosystem where there are, NGOs, there are government organizations, there is even some fly-by-night operators, and
yes.
With our understanding of controls, compliances, we can intervene and make sure, the money spent, every dollar is going towards what's supposed to be achieved. And that's another, very big area we can intervene in. A third area is investment. A lot of the investment proposals come to the CFO for the final sign-off. And, you need to put on a different hat when you evaluate these proposals. And that's one area where CFOs come in. And then fourthly and lastly, as important, is the risk management framework. Make sure the entire ESG piece is part and parcel of that framework. And these are some areas I'm looking at to add value.
Thank you. We're going to deep dive into a lot of these really important parameters that you've just pointed out. But Debasis, let's come to you. ESG might have started off primarily as ethical considerations for any organization of any scale. It's quickly become a big business imperative, though. So how has it directly impacted your business? And how do you see it sort of expanding going forward?
See, obviously there are issues around the regulatory framework, because the regulations are getting increasingly stronger, increasingly tougher, and therefore it is, first of all, it starts with a sort of matter of compulsion than anything else. But there are other things to it. I think by focusing on this, it's an important risk management tool. So what we do in our company, we have embedded that in the risk management process, and that is yielding results in terms of making our control sharper as far as the G part of ESG is concerned, making us more open or making us more receptive to the problems that are there around us in terms of both the E and the S part of ESG. And we have managed to take some very concrete steps. Increasingly, it's also important because this is what is expected from us, from both our stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders in the sense that our customers, our suppliers, the people we work with, and also investors, because the investors are also equally concerned about ESG. And all the media attention is on ESG, and that is making the investors even more serious about this entire thing. So, but there is one big positive in all this. We realize that by doing this as a service company, by doing this we can actually differentiate ourselves, create a brand that we are a ESG, somebody who's very focused on ESG. So in terms of differentiating ourselves from competition, I think we can use this as a tool. And we started this when we are seeing results early.
Can you share some examples of that?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So, deep diving a bit, there is, on the E part of it, there is scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is about emissions which we generate. Scope 2 is about not causing emissions directly, but indirectly in terms of the power that you use and stuff like that. And scope 3 is about anything that is not covered in scope 1 and scope 2 in terms of emissions. Now, we are there partially in all three. Scope 1, we have a resort business where you own properties or run properties, and therefore, of course, there is a direct connection there.
Yeah.
Scope 2 is clearly understood in terms of the power consumption, etc. that happens. And obviously, the vehicles that we hire, the emissions from that. Scope 3. So we figured out that Scope 3 can be a good business initiative. So what we have done now is, with the help of a software company, we have developed an app jointly. They provide the tech, we provided the inputs to it, and we are now marketing the app to our customers. So we have corporate customers who travel with us, use our services for travel, and this app can help them to map the carbon emission, the carbon footprint they are creating for each piece of travel that they are doing. So a company can map its carbon footprint by department, by person, whoever wants to do it in whatever manner, doesn't matter. And this is gaining acceptance. This is also yielding some small amounts of revenue. So ESG can also be, I won't say a money spinner, but can bring in some benefits, some benefit that the CFO starts looking for.
Absolutely, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. That sounds truly like a very unique offering that you've devised. Thanks for sharing that. So, Jacob, hearing all these great points right at the very onset of our conversation, could you help us summarize what are sort of the key factors that CFOs must keep in mind when implementing all the ESG parameters in an organization?
Yeah, so it'll be good for the CFOs to keep in mind that this is not a very watertight normal investment kind of approach that you do. Yes. I mean, you have to look at it very holistically, and whether it's things like investment payback or the company strategy. You have an opportunity to influence the company strategy, so we need to make sure the right inputs are being passed on. We are providing the right guardrails, the risk framework is in place while we are going for all this. At the same time, as Debasis mentioned, all the stakeholders that we have, there is shareholders, there is employees, there is customers, consumers. Across the spectrum, we need to make sure we are incorporating all the feedback that we are receiving. Make sure it's in sync with what's the expectation from the company, and increasingly even the government is a big stakeholder in this. Make sure we are through industry associations interacting with them, helping frame policy. So all this has to be a part of the approach that we undertake, to make sure this the journey that we are taking lands us at the right place, as an industry, as a country. And many of us have exposures in other parts of the world where there could be a bit more progress. We could look to incorporate that. and make sure, we have the best in class, like we've done in digital, for example. We've leapfrogged a lot of stuff that's happening around the world, and, we've probably ahead of everybody else right now. We have an opportunity to create something like that in the ESG area also now. Yeah. And I was at a international conference a few months back, and, I would say we are probably among the top 2 or 3 countries who's making an attempt in this area in terms of, the regulatory oversight, the reporting requirements, all these areas. We find a lot of the countries in the Western world also, I was surprised, is, not yet up to speed on this one. So, lots happening here. I think it's a good area to be in, and, at least in this one, we should expect we will go further and fast.
Absolutely. Wow, well, that's really inspiring, and that creates a great image of the macro that India is getting into right now. Surely, though, hearing all of this, there must be a plethora of challenges, especially as a CFO, that you face when it comes to ESG implementation. Debasis, maybe you could share a few of these.
I think ESG is a cultural change. Yes, it's a process of cultural change. It starts from outside because of external environment, sort of pushes you towards this. But the change finally has to be from within, like any other change. And so how do you do this change? I think the first thing that the CFO needs to do in this journey is and this is not a change that is bringing in money for the organization. Unlike the other changes that the CFO tries to drive. So the first thing that you need to do is to get the leadership team on board, align with the leadership team, get the buy-in, so to say, at the top level. Because change has to start from the top. It cannot start at the bottom. And only when you got that, I think the next level is taking this cultural change right through the organization. It would be in the form of, obviously educating them, training people, and pointing out what the benefits are and why it is important, not only the benefit, why it is compulsory to do this. And finally, I think this needs to form part of your strategic plan, in the long-term plan. It needs to be embedded there. And to get success as a CFO, CFO is always a numbers man, viewed to be the numbers man. So you need to create some metrics for it. Yes. See, I strongly believe that unless you can measure something, you do not know which way you are going, right? So, or how far you have gone. So you need to create metrics, and these metrics are challenging because these are not metrics of the usual profitability or the sales metric. These are very different metrics. So you need to create metrics to understand where we have started the journey, where are you at this point of time, vis-a-vis, where do you want to go, and then keep on measuring yourself at every step. Yes. So, and of course, for the CFO, the other challenge obviously is that the external environment is changing very dramatically. There are changes happening on the regulatory front, the changes happening within the industry, and like Jacob said, he is trying to do a set of things for his organization, and we will all get influenced by that. Yeah. So you need to keep a track of what others are doing. Something like what we do for tracking competition for our regular business. We need to track what others are doing, and use those inputs to improve yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think those are the challenges that CFO usually has.
Jacob, would you like to add anything to this? And also, how do you approach sort of balancing your short-term requirements with the long-term gains that ESG is sort of there for in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to the challenges, one of the challenges that many companies face is on the reporting piece, as I was alluding to earlier. There is no right now a ERP system that kind of captures the data required. So, what is to be captured, when it is to be captured, who captures it, why it's captured, right? All this stuff is up in the air, and you find there's a lot of firefighting that goes at the end of the year when you have to do your BRSR reporting, and you're releasing a corporate strategy report on ESG. So a lot of scrambling happened at that stage. There has to be a bit more method to this. So that's one thing. I find it's evolving, and there are companies that are looking to offer tools for reporting. So that's one thing we need to keep an eye on. on the investment piece, long-term versus short-term, assessing, how do you manage it? So, again, as we were just discussing, this is something is absolutely the right thing to do. We know we have to do it, and you can't always put on your return on investment hat and say, okay, I'm going to support this, I'm going to support this, etc. So, a couple of examples that from Colgate, for example, the tubes that we use, those are not recyclable, or wasn't till last year, because there is a aluminum barrier inside to retain the flavor. And because of that, you have to just discard it, right? And so we spend a lot of time and money coming out with a recyclable tube, and we came out with it last year, and we've opened the technology for competitors also. We said this is too important and objective for us to look at it as a competitive advantage. So we've told the other companies in the space that you can take this technology from us, although we've spent years trying to get this to the market. So this is an example where if you wear your finance hat, you will say you should not spend time researching this, because there's absolutely no returns. But there are consumers out there asking us questions. There are employees asking questions, and we know absolutely this is the right thing to do, right? That's an example. Another example would be like if you're familiar with the solar power generation infrastructure, right? So quite often you cannot mount the solar power generation equipment on the rooftops because they can't hold the weight. You have to put it on the land. So it does take a bit of land, and land is expensive, as we know. So paybacks typically tend to be very long for those. But again, as a finance person, you need to look at it with a different perspective. And finally, this is replacing fossil fuel most likely, non-renewable fuel with renewable fuel, and this is something we need to have in space. So although the paybacks may not be in the range of your normal investment paybacks, these are stuff that needs to happen. So there is you need to just be patient, be convinced that it's the right thing to do. And by convinced, I mean, you need to be sure that, you aren't throwing frivolous things, investment at it and saying, this is for ESG, I'm doing it, so there's going to be no governance, nobody is going to ask any questions. There has to be a roadmap to what you're achieving. Make sure you are, meticulously measuring it. Course corrections are happening, learnings are incorporated in future investment. There has to be a lot of rigor around this, because one thing I always fear about these areas is that because everybody is aligned is the right thing to do, there's a bit of laxity creeps in, saying no questions asked kind of approach.
Yes, also
but, yeah, so we need to subject these things to the same level of rigor, and then things will happen for you.
Thank you. And you also brought up a very interesting point about potential partners that companies can bring on board to help with the reporting mechanisms and so on. As a CFO, what are some of the sort of factors that you think CFOs need to prioritize when it comes to partnerships or investments now, keeping ESG factors in mind?
I mean, ESG has to be, a thread that needs to run into, everything that you do. Whether you, setting up a new plant, or whether you are working with your partners on, a program, a community outreach program. Whatever you're doing, you need to make sure, it kind of falls within, what you defined as part of the ESG strategy, that kind of is part of everything else that you do. So that's very important for you to do. There are always shortcuts and ways to save more money, etc. If you are willing to look the other way, you need to be sure that this is something that you walk the talk every day. It's so deeply embedded that you don't even talk these things, because as it passes down the organization, it does get a life of its own, that this is just more a lip service exercise than a serious attempt at changing the way we do things. And so these are some important facts to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Debasis, how do you approach the skill gap when it comes to all the new parameters that you need to keep in mind? For example, are you hiring new talent required, or upskilling in-house talent? What would you say is the best approach?
See, that's a very important question, because obviously we are not used to dealing with this, all right? And so he looked at both the options that you suggested. And finally, what he went with is more of a hybrid approach. Because we realized we don't have the skill sets within the organization, but it doesn't mean that we can, get in an entirely new bunch of people for doing this. Because what we also needed to do is to change the culture. Yes. And the change in the culture means involving everyone, not just a small team. So we realized that putting in a small team, however small, however large it may be, will not change the culture. So yes, we need to get in people, fresh people who has the right skill set, so that we can learn from them. And they should also go out and teach the rest of the employees. All right? That is how to induce the cultural change. So we have got a couple of guys, and who is now sort of driving it with a very clear agenda as to how it should be. And yeah, of course, it's an uphill task. It's not an easy journey, okay? But we'll get there. I think we are making decent progress, and we'll get there.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, of course, there's such a vast array of stakeholders involved at any given point. So what trends do you foresee in terms of investor engagement, stakeholder engagement? How does the entire plethora of stakeholders come together? What do you foresee?
That's a very interesting question, because a lot of implications as we move into the future. Yes. Right now, we are not there as yet, but going forward, I think there are investor groups who would be interested in making investment, or let me put it this way, more interested in making investment in us if we are known to be in environment friendly or sort of ESG positive, if I can call it that. That's on the investor side. And that goes both for equity investment as well as debt. You know about there's always this set of green bonds, etc., that are there. That's already getting popular. If you come to the customer, the customer is, as far as say travel and tourism is concerned, the customer honestly has not yet caught on to the carbon footprint. They're getting there, but there are already a few of them who want to know that when I suggest a particular travel route for them, what is the carbon footprint that is creating? Right. Very few of them. Right. Okay, so if I am giving you 2 or 3 alternate routes for going to Europe or to the US, you would say that, can you also plot the likely carbon footprint? Happens typically happening at a senior level, not at a middle or junior level, obviously, but the people have started talking about it. Yeah. Mostly multinationals, because I think they are much more aware of this than Indian companies, but yet that's happening. And I foresee a situation that, maybe in the next few years, when I start selling a tour package, I also need to tell him what is the carbon content of that, the carbon footprint that's coming out of that. Just like you buy a packaged product and it tells you that what's the calories in there, I need to tell people that what's the carbon footprint of that package. Yeah. That could be the future in 5 years' time.
Yeah, maybe you could give 3-4 options saying,
Absolutely.
pay a bit more and you could do with less carbon.
Exactly.
So those kind of stuff may also happen.
May also come in very, very soon.
Very interesting.
I can see that, and this will probably happen more for the inbound tourism, people coming in, foreigners coming into India, where we provide coaches or cars, etc. At some point of time, we'll need to move to electric vehicles, right, because they'll be more comfortable with that. Yeah. Because the awareness in India is still much less as compared to overseas. So, but those days are coming for sure.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, it's more likely among stakeholders that an organization will be looked at as a viable one, as a favorable one, if they meet the ESG measures. As you alluded to earlier, Jacob, you mentioned reporting and how this is something, of course, that's going to be a very big factor when it comes to ESG. What are the biggest challenges that you see when it comes to reporting and just really measuring the ESG performance overall?
Yeah, so one of the challenges is, this is not as embedded in the organization. Remember, right, for an organization like ours, a lot of the emissions are happening at the plant level, yes, which is, in a very distant place, right? Remote area, not a lot of interaction. So that's where, whatever she mentioned about, pushing the strategy down the organization is so critical, down to the shop floor level, that they also understand what they are doing, right? So the challenge is that, people who are closest to it are not aware of, what's to be done, how it's to be done, when, at the end of the year right now, everybody scrambles and calls up and, gets into a room, whether it should be real time, and then, how do you use digital tools, right? Which without, like, for example, ERP accounting, for example, right now, nobody even looks at, puts an accounting entry, a debit credit entry, right? When you receive a consignment, you go put a goods receipt, the entry is passed by the system. Nobody even knows what the accounting that happens in the background, right? So similar to that, this has to be kind of not visible to people. When they do their normal stuff, it should get recorded somewhere, and you periodically can churn out reports and use. So that should be the end point. We are at the very beginning right now, and there's also there's lack of consistency between companies. Companies adopting different methods to report emissions or waste disposal stuff, etc. So what we call greenwashing, right, is also happening in the industry. So it's a very important one. We agree on what the uniform reporting should be, and two, have more sophisticated digital tools that can capture it real time, and without everybody taking up a notebook and a pen and writing down and adding and converting it into a report format, right? We need to move away from that, and it's still very early days. But there's a lot of good stuff happening. One of the things I want to add to the changes that we are seeing is that we're seeing a lot of serious organizations come into this space, whether it's for plastic waste management, we've seen very smart entrepreneurs come in with digital tools. And that's why, this year, for example, we were able to dispose of 120% of our plastic consumption because, we work through a network of 5 companies, but they are quite evolved, and we also were surprised at the, the digital tools that they were using to record it, etc. So there is people,
a lot of innovation happening
coming
around
in,
this.
smart people, and in India, when smart people come into a space, things happen, like we've seen in the D2C area. So I remain very optimistic that we're going to go leaps and bounds in most of these areas in the short run.
Absolutely. Debasis, from a financial standpoint, how do you see ESG initiatives ultimately impacting companies' risk management practices and overall just sort of resilience, as we've been talking, in the long run?
See, I think that's already started happening. May not be too much from the environmental and the social part yet, but certainly on the governance side. As you know, the regulators, whether it's the SEBI, the RBI, or any other regulator that I can talk about, they are increasingly raising the level, their level of expectations, okay, increasingly getting tougher. And obviously all for the good cause. The long-term goal is to, make the business more transparent, more well-governed, and so on. So that is, and if you don't fall in line, then it's in for a hard time, right? So there is already a large amount of regulatory risk that each of us, whichever field we are in, we are going through, and therefore regulatory risk is one of our top 10 risks that we have today. And we do this risk assessment exercise internally. We take 20 different risks and try to, do a sort of assessment as to what's the ranking, relative ranking. And in the last couple of years, regulatory risk, the ranking of regulatory has actually gone up the ladder. Okay, so earlier it used to be in the bottom 10. It has moved into top 10, and now this year I think it moved into top 5. So, which also shows that people are getting more aware that this is something that we need to comply with. Compliance is important in order to do business. But quite apart from being a compulsion, I think there are some very good things out here. It is also making us more aware of what should be done, what we should be doing, making us aware of the consequences of our action, and that's the right way to. And that way, making the organization more transparent, more acceptable to stakeholders. Yeah, which is very important, because finally we are answerable to stakeholders, whether it's an investor, whether it's a customer, whether it's an employee, or anybody else, and even to suppliers actually. And the cleaner image that we have, the better it is for the organization. We should be known to be a company that people strive to deal with. You know, they feel attracted towards the company. I think that's very important.
Jacob, to your point, SEBI, as we know, has also made it mandatory for ESG disclosure for the top 1,000 listed companies in India. Would you say that India Inc. is ready for this, or are organizations sort of jittery about the whole requirement?
Yeah, I mean, it's been coming for a while. So we had, good 2 years notice, and, 22, 23 was mandatory. So, now we have to talk about implementing it. It's been decided that you have to do the reporting. So, the reporting is an area we need to continue to improve on, who does what, where, when, etc., leveraging digital tools, making sure it's real-time capture of information, similar to the ERP systems we use for recording all the conventional accounting and reporting stuff, where people quite often don't realize that what they are generating is getting converted into something. This is all captured with almost invisibly, and then it gets converted into the reporting. So what we also did this year is that we used the BRSR was mandatory, but we also released a second edition of our ESG strategy report, and we combined it into the annual report. So we thought it was a good opportunity to, the data was already there, talk a little bit more about it in detail, and release one consolidated annual report, which we've got very good feedback on.
Great. Wow, fantastic. Debasis?
Yeah, I think Jacob's covered most of it. But I agree with him, what he's saying, that finally it's a journey. Okay, and we take every year we take a few steps towards that. So it became mandatory in 22-23.
Yes.
But we started a journey in FY22. No one really told us to, but we just thought I will start. And if I look at the output, which comes in the form of the annual report, I think we made significant progress in terms of the way we capture data, the way we have gone about actually doing things on ground and not just writing something about it. I think we have made decent progress. And I think at the beginning, at the cultural change, I don't think I can say it's complete, but it started happening.
Yes.
Okay. And this is important because that will take us in the way ahead.
Yes, absolutely. We've discussed so many facets, of course, of the entire complexity of the situation with ESG. Can I request you to share an example, perhaps a case study? Could be your organization or any other organizations that, of course, have faced their fair share of challenges in their ESG journey, but have overcome it somehow and come out on top. Any examples you could share?
Yeah, maybe I can go in first on that. And this is a case study that we looked at while we were working on this journey or preparing for this journey. And this is the story of Nike, the shoe brand. So as you know, Nike outsources a lot of its supplies. A lot of the production happens in various countries. And the working conditions over there, they may not be the best. They were not the best. They started getting a lot of flack from NGOs, environmental groups, etc., in terms of the pollution those factories are creating, the working condition of the employees, so on and so forth. And obviously it was causing a reputation risk for Nike. So Nike did something very interesting. They did not shy away from it, did not try to defend whatever they are doing. Instead, they actually went out to those suppliers, inspected the condition, recontracted with them, so that the pollution levels could be minimized over a period of time, the working conditions could become more acceptable for everyone around, and made changes which people are expecting them to do. In parallel, they went out and spoke to the world at large as to what they were doing, and that brought in a degree of transparency and honesty about this entire thing. And therefore, the reputation, even before actually they completed their process, they started getting rid of the reputation risk that was there. And in the end, when they completed all of this, they obviously, people had more faith in the brand, which is very important. And because Nike is all of finally is not more about the brand and less about the product.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Jacob?
Yeah, one of the challenges we ran into while on this journey was we figured out, Colgate, for example, most of our sales comes from what we call indirect trade channels, to distributors, to kiranas, to wholesale, etc. And while we stationed women sales officers in these areas as part of our DE&I journey, we figured out that one unexpected challenge was the lack of hygienic toilets in those areas where they would work on, especially outside the metros. And what we then did was that we worked with our distributors, made sure they had toilets that could be used by women. And we are also talking to restaurants, hotel chains along the routes to see if we can tie them and let them have access to women to use it, because that's the last reason why we would want to lose women talent, because of lack of access to something as basic as this.
Yes, fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you for these case studies, these examples, and overall really helping us decode what it means to be on this ESG journey, the challenges and the way forward. It's been an absolute pleasure. Before we wrap up, if I can ask each of you to sort of summarize and share with all the CFOs out there, what is sort of the one key takeaway and piece of advice you would give them when it comes to implementing a successful ESG journey?
I would say do it because it's the right thing to do. The returns will come in due course.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Jacob said, but also need to add that the CFO has to be very patient in this journey. This is a long-term thing that we are doing, which is why I said right in the beginning that this has to be embedded in your strategic plan and cannot be short-term focused. So plan for the long term, act accordingly, and I'm sure we'll succeed.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Well, on that note, that's all we have for you on this power-packed episode of ET Studios CFO Blueprint in association with ET CFO, discussing all you need to know about mastering the ESG journey. Stay tuned for more in-depth conversations like this, where we chat with India's leading CFOs who inspire us with their success stories, their leadership and insights. Until next time, many thanks for watching.